Let's shift straight into the second panel on a topic that is obviously very related to the first one. I loved Dan's idea that capital and labor are the ingredients and the entrepreneur is the cook, the chef. Now we're going to discuss entrepreneurship and its enemies, and we'll shift straight to our first speaker, which is Terry Anker from the Anker Consulting Group, I think it said. Okay, thank you very much for coming all the way to Copenhagen.
Well,
I look forward to hear what you have to say.
Well, actually, to be most direct, we've got about 14 companies, private equity investors. So since I graduated from law school, all I've done is build companies from the ground up. They're all startups, and they are various sizes now, but I have a partner in each company, so that gives you a little bit of a sense. Directly, entrepreneur, back to what you're talking about. My wife calls me gainfully unemployed. She said, I don't know how you have money in the checking account necessarily, but it always seems to be there. So that's what we're talking about. Thank you for having us here today. I couldn't be more delighted to not be on an airplane. I don't know if you realize yesterday we spent over 12 hours in some rural Spain. We think it was very pleasant. It was not pleasant at all. So I'm thrilled to be here. I took a tour of the city today. I thought about whether I should tell this story or not, but I have a fantastic connection to the city of Copenhagen. When I was a kid growing up in a farm in rural Indiana, which is really in the middle of nowhere, the first exchange student that I ever met was a girl from Copenhagen. And she told me one night after a county fair that she wanted to kiss an American boy. That was me. I don't know if she was telling the truth, but I was very happy to get the kiss. So when I came to Copenhagen, I was very happy to be in your city. Thank you for having me. One of the companies that we own is
What was her name?
I'm not telling you because it's still off on Facebook to make sure that she wasn't married to anyone on any of the panels. Because then I might be watching you now. Exactly. Barbara will kill me because I take too much time, but many years ago we were finishing a transaction to launch a group of newspapers. We now have 12 newspapers in that group. And I, in that particular transaction, needed a little more money in order to get the deal done, and so we were bringing in a couple investors. And we were having a final meeting at a lunch with someone who I didn't really know, but that was agreeing to be an investor. And he reached into his pocket, I thought pulling out a list of questions, and he slapped down a photograph and slid it across the table. And it's a photograph of me with some woman in college. And I couldn't think of a name, I was drawing a blank. He's like, that's my wife. And I, thanks to to luck or good fortune or God or however you want to describe it, I came up with a name very quickly, and I said, "Oh, what a lovely girl!" Hoping I don't know where we're going to go with this. He burst out laughing. He said, "Last night I said I was going to invest in a company with Terry Anker," and she runs and comes back with this picture. I'm not sure what they talked about, but anyway, this is one of the companies that we're invested in. This is Sean O'Connor, who's my partner. And these are some of the beers that we brew. The reason I pulled this picture up because it talks about the mind of innovation. Entrepreneurs are slightly different creatures. John Charlavakis and I were talking today as we were motoring around the city in a boat, a very short boat, but a boat nonetheless, about whether entrepreneurship is something that can be taught or not. It's my view that entrepreneurship is something that you can learn skills and you can become more knowledgeable on how to be effective, but you can't necessarily learn it. And today what we're going to talk about is what motivates entrepreneurs. What are motivators? Well, do they seek a culture of innovation? Everyone talks about that now. It's very vogue to say we want to live in cities that attract these thought leader types, and we spend a lot of money and effort on that. Is it belief in access? We want to be in a city where there's a lot of things happening. I took that picture in Hong Kong recently from a tall building, and you can access anything. Is it because of easy money? Do entrepreneurs chase when government says we're going to give away a lot of money? Is it because of lifestyle? This is my 13-year-old at the time. The first time he was allowed to sail a 38-foot sailboat by himself, he thinks he is the king of the world. This is what motivates him. Is it community? You want to be a part of a community of entrepreneurs, or is it because of government incentives? And Anders really set it up beautifully today, I think, which is the real thing that I'd like to get to. If I leave you with anything, is that we, government, academics, even business people, seek incentives to entrepreneurship rather than really thinking about what it is that prevents entrepreneurs from doing what they're going to do naturally. I don't believe that you can incentivize your customer enough to buy your product. I don't believe that Sean O'Connor, this guy, this crazy Irishman, and he does have two different color eyes. God made him that way. I don't know what's wrong with him, but it's not the picture. One's green, one's blue. It's the strangest thing you've ever seen. But he's charming, but there's nothing that could prevent him from being an entrepreneur. He just is that way. He's going to find a way. Incentives aren't required to get him to do it, but there are disincentives. There are things that will prevent him from doing it. One of the things that's come up recently is America or other countries around the world, are they pro-business or are they anti-business? I think it's a very interesting way to frame it. This came out of a group of meetings for a thing called the Association of Private Enterprise Education that just occurred a few weeks ago. And so one of the things that I pulled out of this was a quote by a guy named Nigel Green. This DeVere Group is a very large sort of a investment company that invests in startups and second stage companies around the world. And he's appointing to this president, but it could be any other. And what he's talking about specifically is this idea that it's immoral for business people to do what business people do. He was talking about specifically about Burger King moving to Canada in order to benefit from more favorable regulatory environment in Canada. But what I think is being said here is very important, which is Burger King doesn't have a desire to move to Canada. Maybe they do, but they're being disincentivized to stay where they are. You know, I look at the businesses that we have, whether it's the brewery, the newspapers, or the receivership folks, or any of the different companies, and we tend to operate as we hope to, charting our own course, but we stop when we run into a roadblock that's often set.
I think just quickly, what is inversions? Some people might not know what inversions are.
Inversion, essentially, well, and there are probably other people that could explain it even better than I can. But it's just seeking a tax environment that is superior for your company. We'll talk about that later if anybody has any other questions. All right, here's what entrepreneurs fear. What I don't fear, surprisingly, is my competition, which I wish that anchor were an anchor that were related to me, but any of you have ever drunk the Anker beer? Nope. Big beer in Germany and other places, our beer's better, even though we couldn't name an anchor because they already did. What I fear is that woman right there. That's my wife of 25 years. But what entrepreneurs actually fear are taxes. They fear the complexity and the consistency of taxes. Last year I signed 9 tax returns, and I pray that I did them correctly. It's something that I fear, and I shouldn't have that fear in my own business. What else do entrepreneurs fear? And I'm not talking about myself, I'm talking about even the people that we work with or anyone out there, and this mostly came from Forbes and a number of other studies that have been over the years. They fear regulation. Well, what do they fear in regulation? They fear caprice, meaning that regulation is going to change depending on the winds of politics, and they fear the burden of regulation. In the beer company, for example, we went into a historic building that had brick floors. And we bought the building because it was in disrepair and it had been in a neighborhood that had been abandoned, and we were going to build an important facility there and put a lot of money into it. The city was delighted that we were going to do that. Promptly after we bought the building and began to renovate it, a different inspector from the city came in and said, well, you have to cover these brick floors. And we said, well, the city wanted us to keep them. No, you must cover the floors because beer is a hazardous material and it might seep into the floors. I'm like, beer is only hazardous if you drink it. If we spill it, it doesn't hurt anything. But they were unpersuaded, and it took months then to get the building open, and we had to negotiate. And those are the kind of burdens that were not accounted for when we put the budget together. All right. Here are the other anxieties that entrepreneurs universally express. And this is across dozens of studies and surveys that have been done. And I'll be interested to hear from the academics in the crowd, especially if they agree with these. One is that entrepreneurs routinely fear that they're putting their family into a position where they're going to be financially insecure. That they worry about whether their decisions will be good ones for their family and the people that they care about. I would suggest that it's even greater than that. I routinely think about, or when I'm speaking to young entrepreneurs, people in college, and the question is, what is your favorite part of your job? And I'm like, well, I pay dozens, scores, hundreds of mortgages. What's your least favorite part of your job? That I feel responsible for all those mortgages. All of those people that are working in the companies across the spectrum that have car payments and homes and new children on the way have to feel that they're secure in those jobs. And it becomes very important that the entrepreneur make decisions in an incredibly intentional and thoughtful way, not only for his own family, but for those who are dependent upon him. Failure or social retribution. And they really almost match up perfectly when you look at percentages around the world. People are afraid of failing, certainly, and I think we can all understand that. We've been embarrassed. But the second is this idea of social retribution, that we will be shamed because we find success or because we make a decision in business. And I see some of the entrepreneurs in the room. You must be entrepreneurs because you're nodding yes. It's a very interesting thing. You work tremendously hard and you make decisions rarely for money, but then you're often shamed if you hit that success. And then the final is that you're going to have an imbalanced risk ratio. And what that means when you're talking to someone is that you're going to be spending an enormous amount of time and money, and the return that you're going to get off of that is going to be insufficient to justify what it is that you're doing. When an entrepreneur comes to me and says, I have this idea, the first meeting is always about them. I want to understand who they are. Can they maintain relationships with other people? Are they good human beings? It doesn't really matter about some of the things that you might have guessed, but I want to know who they are because they're going to be my business partners. I'm going to trust them with my money and my family. But the second thing is, do they really have a business? There are loads of ideas, but a business is something where you get more out of it than you put into it. And routinely I found that I put more into it than I get out of it. Those are called failures. They're not called businesses. So at any rate, it doesn't necessarily matter what's showing from the surface. We just got a couple more of these. So what most attracts entrepreneurs? Again, universal categories across every study that's done almost in any university. One, opportunity. Entrepreneurs seek opportunity. Wherever there is opportunity, an entrepreneur will come and exploit it. Believe me, I had no interest in newspapers. I had interest in beer, but not to make it. These things came to me, and I was paying attention or was willing to see them when they arrived. Opportunity. Universities, some are very opportunistic. Others are not. And you can certainly tell the difference. The second thing that universally attracts entrepreneurs most, and I've sort of categorized these to keep the slides clean, but it's freedom, personal autonomy, and a lot of control over your life. You need to have a lot of control over the things that you do or the decisions that you make. I once told someone earlier in my career that it wasn't that I wasn't going to lose my job. It's just that I knew when it was going to happen. Because I knew that the company was going to fail or that things weren't going to work out. And there was something about that mattered enormously to me. And to a lot of other people it does not. And then the final is that many entrepreneurs want to leave a legacy or they want to have a sense of accomplishment. Well, the interesting thing, when you look at this list, what isn't on it is government subsidy or enormous amounts of money or having the community fall at their feet or being in a throne in one of these spectacular buildings. One thing I have noticed about Copenhagen, there are a lot of crowns. Lots of crowns. But it's very interesting. There's symbols. And the question is, do entrepreneurs do that? I'm not sure that they do. This is, see if you can guess which one I am in here. It's very exciting. I'm number 10, which is awesome. What's not on the list is not crusading. Entrepreneurs, at least in my book, and I think it's consistent across the small company entrepreneurs that I work with or that we know, it's not about going out and carrying a flag for, I'm going to change this or that. They're trying to build a business. They're trying to raise their families. Later stage entrepreneurs, the ones that are often hired by someone else, come in with an agenda, with a desire to crusade or change the world. And the second thing that's not on the list for entrepreneurs is chasing fame, which I think is really interesting. That's why I put the basketball up there, because I could have been a basketball star, do you think? So maybe it wasn't that I couldn't chase it that was the problem, rather than I didn't want to. But most entrepreneurs simply don't chase it. The mindset that exists, and we're almost done here, and I thought this was a great quote by Michael Jordan, but I like the picture even better. What the heck is wrong with that goldfish? You know, why would he jump out of the bowl that's perfectly good with all those other goldfish to get into that one? Although if you've sat on planes or in airport lounges in Barcelona, you know what happens. I almost jumped out there. So. I've missed more than 9,000 shots in my career. I've lost almost 300 games. 26 times I've been trusted to take the game's winning shot and missed. I failed over and again in my life, and that's why I succeeded. I think that's the basic mindset of an entrepreneur. You're driven to do these things. I promise you that woman, that beautiful woman that I showed you earlier, would much have preferred that I be a lawyer. I get up every day and I go to an office and she knows what I'm doing and it's very simple, but I couldn't do it. I did well in law school, but I just couldn't do it. There's something wrong with me. And so what is it in a sentence? I'd say entrepreneurs are innovative, and we talked about that in the opening slide, but they remain incredibly pragmatic. When I hear a new idea, when somebody comes to me with this great thing, I'm like, it just isn't ready. Your customer's not there. We don't have enough money to wait for the customer to get to your new product. The second thing is entrepreneurs tolerate risk but are incredibly cautious. It's amazing how I spend most of my time is not seeking risk, but it's trying to quantify it so that I can then prevent it from hurting me. The best lawyers, and I say this all the time to lawyers that I went to law school with or friends of mine or certainly lawyers that work for us, I want a lawyer who will tell me what the risk is and then stop talking. I don't need them to tell me what decision to make. I want them to say, if you do this, you'll go to jail and you're too pretty to go to jail. If you do this, you'll never make any money. So somewhere in this continuum, what are the stages, what are the things, where are the cliffs? Same thing with accountants or any professional services where I can live my life. I do the same thing with doctors, actually. How many beers can I drink? How many cigars? Before I'm sure to die. They've given me a number I don't like. All right. Next one. Entrepreneurs drive change, but they embrace the known. Why do we make beer? Because beer is mostly water and it's nearly addictive. It's a fantastic product. But it's known. I can understand it. I can wrap my head around it very quickly. I know how much copper we need. I know how much hops we need. I know where to source these things. It's something that I can understand or wrap my head around. I'm incredibly impressed by people like Steve Jobs. It was a photo that came up earlier because he has a much larger capacity, or had a much larger capacity than someone like me, to bring all these variables into the known. But I've never talked to anyone, regardless of how crazy or outlandish their ideas are, where they don't manage what they know. Does that make sense to you? Okay. The final one is entrepreneurs do not require incentive, but will avoid disincentive. That is so crucially important. And it's interesting to me, each and every time that I've been invited to talk to government officials or anyone about how do we get entrepreneurs to do X, I'm like, stay out of the way. And that's something that's extremely difficult for government officials especially to do. They have this burning desire to do something. But entrepreneurs are just naturally driven to do things. They will find a market. Remove disincentives. Make it easier for me to open a brewery. I'll open a brewery. Make it easier for me to go into banking. I'll go into banking. Make it easier for me to print newspapers. I'll print newspapers. I naturally follow that sort of a mindset. I think that's it. There you go. Thanks.
Thank you very much. That's what they said back in France in 1600. Laissez-nous faire.
I know. You're exactly right.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move to the panel. And our double act panel is Christian Bjørnskov, Professor of Economics of Aarhus University. Christian, this time we'll take you up one at a time, I think, because otherwise people sitting in wait. Christian, off you go.
Thank you. Now, Nikolai Foss and I have been doing a number of studies. We right now writing our fourth paper on entrepreneurship. I agree with what Terry said. And nothing completely wrong or anything with that. True. But Nikolai and I have been trying to do something else. We've looked at why do entire societies then have more entrepreneurs and more successful entrepreneurs.
And Nikolai Foss is professor of
Nikolai Foss is professor at CBS here in Copenhagen. Now, what we find is actually fairly consistent with what Terry tells us, that it's not about incentives, it's about disincentives. So, taxes are disincentives. High taxes, in particular high marginal taxes, disincentivize entrepreneurs. Because, well, as in Denmark, we like entrepreneurs. We embrace entrepreneurs, but if they succeed, all hell breaks loose. in the form of taxes. So we should always remember, and that's very consistent with what Nikolai and I find, is that most entrepreneurs, when they succeed, have their income as personal income, and it's taxed not as capital income, but as personal income. So why doesn't Denmark have many entrepreneurs? We have some of the highest marginal taxes in the world. We have a very large public sector, so about half of it, all Danes working in the public sector, so by definition they're not entrepreneurs. You're not an entrepreneur in the public sector. Second, sound money. So having stable prices, stable monetary policy, transparent rules around monetary policy and so on, that turns out to be really, really important. Again, high or low prices, well, their incentives probably don't do much, but not knowing what the price level is going to be, what monetary policy is going to be, or what the monetary regulatory framework is going to be next year, is a major disincentive for entrepreneurs. So what we find is that while specific regulations don't seem to matter much, the regulations and the stability of the monetary policy framework is central to understanding why some countries have more entrepreneurs than other countries. And that comes out very, very clearly across the last 40 years in the OECD. Countries with smaller governments, stable monetary frameworks, in general, consistently have more entrepreneurs and more successful entrepreneurs. But going back, let me just point to the great Deirdre McCloskey. Because what McCloskey has done in a number of books is looked at, so entrepreneurs, how are they regarded socially? We know that the entrepreneurship was not comme il faut in the Roman elite 2,000 years ago. We know that it definitely wasn't the way to do things in the 16th and 1700s. But sometime in the 18th century, in Britain and in the Netherlands, entrepreneurship, making money, exploiting opportunities, became socially acceptable and even socially desirable to many people, both normal people and what we would consider the political elite. And it's that time when you have the social acceptability plus the policy framework that does not disincentivize you, that you get the Industrial Revolution. Masses of entrepreneurs that introduce a lot of goods that make everyone's life better. That combination is central to understanding why do some countries have many and why do some countries have few entrepreneurs. And I think we should. I'd end with where Terry began, with Barack Obama. What he and what many other politicians are trying to do is make entrepreneurship socially unacceptable. Yeah. Thanks.
You didn't build that. Is that what you're referring
yes.
to? Yes. Okay. Just before we could I ask someone to close the windows? I think we're being struck by Richard Rand's insufficient global warming here at the panel. It's getting a little bit chilly. Then our next brief 5-minute speaker is Barbara Kohn, who is president of the Friedrich Hayek Institute in Austria, in Vienna, and director of the Austrian Economic Center.
Yes, I'm an entrepreneur with this free market roadshow because it's literally running around through Europe with over 400 speakers and having 35 partners, well, local partners plus their partners, managing all this and doing this is a lot of fun. It's entrepreneurship, and it's intellectual entrepreneurship, if you want to call it this way. My argument today is actually very simple. I will go that today's startups will be the Wirtschaftswunder of tomorrow, and actually of the not only tomorrow, but the next decade. And that we need to reconsider not only the frameworks that you were talking about, but also what makes an entrepreneur tick. Because the story of how, for example, those great figures that made the Industrial Revolution possible, or as I pointed out, this created this Wirtschaftswunder after World War II and the growth of the US, they do tick differently. And if we look at the numbers that you were referring to a little, I would just like to give you the numbers of Europe for the early stage entrepreneurs in a society. It's in Italy 2.3% of the entire labor adult population. In Germany, it's 4.2% of the adult population. In France, surprise, surprise, it's 5.8%. So you could argue there is probably no other alternative than sitting on, being unemployed. So you just try and create your own job, which would be a good solution. But there are areas in the world where it's much better. The Americas are unfortunately down to 7.6%, but China is 14% and Brazil is 17%. But again, this is just also about the environment that they are living in. What Terry was pointing out is also that we have to get around our inner rat thing and make sure that this inner swine is bypassed. And we cannot do that if we look at government interventions, at those high taxes, at those interventions, those subsidies that we keep seeing. We need to look at other things. And by doing that, I thought that the mix of fatalism, the mix of fear for competition, and the mix of admiration, the lack of admiration for entrepreneurs that we were just referring before, is actually driving our society. This envy debate that we see these days, bringing the morality of free marketeers, of entrepreneurs, of those who take the risk, take it away to this envy debate that Piketty and many other people started, is bad for entrepreneurs. It's not sexy to be an entrepreneur anymore. You are seen as somebody who is exploiting others. And I think we should be or we should have long passed this discussion. But the good news is, if we look at the success stories of the Industrial Revolution that built Europe, of those companies or those men and women that built Europe after the Second World War, and we might have a chance if we see the so-called financial crisis or the sovereign debt crisis as an opportunity, and look back at what characterizes those people who made their fortune. It's either being a rascal or embracing viral marketing, which was done by Alfred Krupp when he outcharmed the London exhibition, the World Exhibition in the 1850s, and just made kickstarted his company back there. Or whether it's daringness, as Bertha Benz did when she raced her husband's car, who he did not back then in the 1850s. Or 1890s, sorry, she was the reason for his success. It's negotiating capabilities that people have, outcharm other people. It's being direct. It's assessing also how people interact with each other and what their needs are. All these things make an entrepreneur. And as Terry says, at the university that I teach, we don't teach entrepreneurship. You can't teach it. You can teach tools, which is how to read budgets, how to make budgets, etc., how to deal with your tax lawyer. But you also have this inner motivation and this drive, and you have to be able to embrace risk And I think this is a very important thing. You may fail, but you're only stupid if you fail by doing the same mistakes twice or 3 times. And this is something that we need to replant in our society or in our people. Just be aware that you can fail, it doesn't matter, as long as you stand up. And then again, be creative and circumvent the unfriendly environment that is true for many businesses here in Europe. So I think there is actually an opportunity, and those VCs that support, because it's the venture capitalists, it's the creativity of the young generation, those will be the success drivers for tomorrow. And I think we need to support those people.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Our next speaker is Frank Hohmann from the Choco Fine Cocoa Company.
Thank you. There's a short technical interlude here as I set up my computer because I made a multimedia presentation. It's the first time I tried to do that, so let's see if I succeed. But it requires my computer to be actually connected, which it is. I'm going to talk about entrepreneurship. I have a little bit of an alternative background, actually as a public employee. For many years I was what in Denmark you call a tjenestemand in the Danish army. So I now know that side, the public sector, and how efficient it can be. I also have an MBA. I spent a stint with McKinsey & Company, the consultants, before I became an entrepreneur. Basically 2 companies, Census, which is a high-tech company. We made a communications protocol for wireless communication between dumb nodes. That means wireless communication between light switches and sensors, alarms, those kind of nodes. We sold it to Sigma in the US. And it's actually the world standard within that particular market today, after many years. But, so in 2007, I started Choco, which is a fine cocoa company. Fine cocoa are beans that go into gourmet chocolate that tastes good. The thing is, you need to actually plant trees that can produce fine flavor cocoa. So you have to plant a lot of trees in Honduras, where Mike has his 3 cities, going to have, hopefully soon. And other parts of Central America, we also have projects in Africa and in Asia, planting cocoa trees, and then after the planting of the cocoa trees, we will sell the beans. We actually do a lot of outgrower planting, so we help very poor people actually get a much better price for their cocoa and get out of poverty by going into an alliance with our company. No subsidies at all, because I totally agree with the comments from the gentleman that any aid is actually detrimental to growth in these countries. So I know something about emerging countries. Here we are in cocoa forests and beans, and myself receiving an award. So during the last 15 years, I think I've gotten a global perspective from Census. We started the company in Denmark, had our engineers here in Denmark, and they happen to be from Intel's worldwide chip development center that was located here in Copenhagen. We had our markets in the US. We had investors from the US, from the UK, and from Denmark, from Silicon Valley actually. And our company was globalized in the way that we had part of our resource here in Denmark, our engineers, very good engineers, didn't work that much with the Americans, the ones did in Silicon Valley. They always had to leave at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to go pick up babies in the kindergarten. It's typical Danish, they get in at 9 or something, because they have all these very highly driven engineers in Silicon Valley that actually sleep under their desks. So they're very worried, I remember back then, that we would get out-competed by these American companies, but we didn't, because Danish engineers actually are very productive. Back then, they were in my company, my Anker. So we had our people here, but we had markets in the US, because here in Europe, nobody wanted a technology that worked and didn't cost too much, because it had to be German or Austrian, whatever. There was a lot of government regulation around these things here in Europe. So we went to the US, and over there, it's another mentality. If it works, it's affordable, let's get it to the market. That's a very good example for me of how you bridge the gap between different countries, how different countries are more an obstacle, borders are more an obstacle to your business than actually any advantage. What you work with are people, not countries. Governments, as an entrepreneur, you sometimes see only as a nuisance. You work with people, it doesn't matter where they come from. It can be Indian engineers, or it can be Danish engineers, or some guy who works somewhere in the middle of nowhere in the Midwest of the US. And we're all together in this project together, somehow inside the company, or suppliers to my company, or as people who buy the product that I make. And so borders break down, have broken down for me personally during the years as an entrepreneur. Shoko is a very good example of how we're bridging the gap between emerging markets and emerged markets, like our market here in Denmark. We have a lot of knowledge that they don't have in the emerging markets. The emerging markets are way behind some places like Africa and Latin America, where they still do not have the access to information that we have here. Many times because governments, again, are an obstacle. In Ethiopia, where we have a project, the government seems to want to plan every single thing that we do, and we have to apply for everything that we want to do. And out there are just fields of hundreds and hundreds, thousands of hectares, very good soil, ready to be planted, and nobody's doing anything because it's really, really difficult to get things done in these places. Many people here do not know it, but if there was a free market, if I was free to do what I could do and what I can do, we could plant up all that soil very, very rapidly, and we could feed all people in Africa and people. That's my experience. Of course, it's an anecdote. Why do you become an entrepreneur? Well, actually, it serves the Maslow pyramid for myself. And I like that. It also happens to be good for the wealth of nations. But nations are a relatively new phenomenon. They sprang out of all these feudal entities that we had before. Violent entities that thought they could control us and were rent-seeking because they had a violent monopoly on certain privileges. And we, the entrepreneurs, had to sort of earn our rights to pass the territory, to go down the river, or whatever. And then, luckily, we went into democracies like we have today. It was only 70 years ago we got rid of the Nazis. 40 years ago we got rid of the communists. So it's relatively new, the whole idea of freedom, democracy that we have here. But I think most entrepreneurs actually do not become entrepreneurs because they want to serve their country. They necessarily want to pay taxes to one place. So I'm back to Denmark. I vote with my feet. I've never ever voted in an election. Sorry, fellow Danes, because that's not coming from here. But I vote with my feet, and I voted for the US. I lived in the US. Every time I had to go to my office in Silicon Valley, a very, very wealthy area of the world, probably the wealthiest in the world, I had to sort of squat over this homeless guy. He's lying this on the street every morning almost. And we would have these, in San Francisco, you have all these very clever smart people. And you have these school districts around that are just, they suck completely. Their schools suck. And you have this complete disparity between people who have a lot and people who don't have a lot. So access to possibilities that we have here in Denmark. So my fellow Danes, I voted with my feet coming back to Denmark. I was there for 10 years in Mexico. The weather was great, but the government didn't work. So it's very trivial to us. And all those things you have here in Denmark. It works. You walk the streets. You pay some tax, yes, but at the end of the day, that's not what's going to be the difference. 5% is more or less. I don't care. Actually, corporate tax rate here in Denmark is not that bad compared to other countries. Transparency is pretty high here, I must say. So there's a lot of positive, good arguments for why Denmark is actually not that competitive. And, we have this panel, we have this discussion here, and I listen to it, and at the same time, I feel like a foreigner everywhere I go, being an expat coming back to Denmark, I realize that actually 94% of voters in Denmark vote for a party that do not want to change anything. No lower taxes, no lower public sector, forget it. I'm sorry, Americans, you came all the way here to speak to somebody who will not listen, because that's just not the mentality in these countries. And So a lot of things are working for these countries, but of course there's a future. And there's four. I have very little time. I know. I just have so many things to say. McKinsey Global Institute says, and they probably did some fact finding on this before they came out with it, that there's four global forces that will drive change very fast in all countries around the globe. It's urbanization. It's a lot to it, but one of the consequences of urbanization is that cities, people are moving to cities. Cities will try to provide the best service possible to their citizens, so they attract citizens. You have a little bit of Mark's point from before, that I actually think that one of the trends will drive towards getting more little clusters of where you can live. Technology, demographics, people are getting older, so here in Denmark that means that less people, even lesser people, are going to drag that bandwagon that we looked at in the chart earlier on today. And that's not sustainable. It's simply not sustainable at the same time as capital and labor becomes more and more fruitless. If taxes go up more, I'm out. Find some way out. And about 94% of the population thinks, oh, we cannot go out because it's not solidarity. What is that? Is that socialism? I mean, we can go two ways in Europe. I think we can go, another McKinsey chart, it's very complicated, I won't go into them. We can go two ways. One is the way that we seem to go, two wolves and a lamb, and voting on what they're going to have for dinner. That's not going to work. It's not nice.
Not for the lamb.
But the lamb had this.
Exactly. No, but I'm going to go. Everybody's going to go. Everybody who wants to make something, they're not going to drag that bandwagon. They don't care about public policy or all that stuff. We want to do our Maslow pyramid because we're human. We want to release our energy. We don't want to be controlled by these guys. And therefore, here it comes. This is what I want to say. This is the whole point. So if you can't remember anything I said, just remember Lenin. Power to the people, power to us. It's not about government, it's not about them, it's about you. Going out there and doing what you want. It's a good tune. That's me when I was
Okay, and our last speaker, who was not in the initial program but who's joined us, which is great, is Stefan Winberg, who's from the World Taxpayers Association. And yes, you get my microphone, which is,
Okay.
it
It works. You can hear me?
speak up because the microphone is only for the live feed.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Otherwise, it's your voice.
My voice usually doesn't carry very well. I'm very happy to be here. I've been in media most of my life. I was actually, as a young man of about 30, for a short time on the board of the your newspaper Börsen when I was with Bonnier. So I worked with the major publishers in Europe. And the last many years I worked with Swedish Taxpayers organization. And since June last year I'm chairman of the World Taxpayers, a network of about 60 organizations from China to Australia to Korea, North America, Europe, and a few in Africa. So, and I enjoy that very much. It's quite interesting, and to start to really connect with all these groups. I have a few slides as well. Let's see, one is, it's already up there. The story we had from Frank, I can't avoid telling, adding to the story a little bit, because about 6-7 years ago, a few of us gave some seed money to a couple of guys in their late 30s, who had worked for several years to start a company selling advertising in your cell phones, which they have now 6-7 years later, they have 250 people employed, our turnover of 50 million, established all across Europe. And the talks we've had recently is, should we go into North America? And those of us who have a bit of gray hair, we say no. It's too complicated. Competition, you can't really judge what's going to happen, too much regulations. To try to be big in all of you across Europe, and then maybe in a few years' time, when you're strong enough, you might think about America. So America is not always the heaven for entrepreneurs. Now we heard already here from Terry about what it takes to be an entrepreneur. In short, I think it's seeing an opportunity and daring to go after it. And you also say, let's see how I get this moving, eh? No? Which do I press? Ah, there, okay. Now, in America, they used to say that building a better mousetrap, that's the idea of business. And this construction is very bad, it's very old, too many moving parts, many different materials and wood which no one likes. For many, many years, this great opportunity in entrepreneurship was left untouched. But now we have finally some entrepreneurs in this. And here's a French version. It's called the guillotine. I'm not sure it's very effective. It's quite complicated, like a French car. This is a Swedish version. It's or the IKEA version, you might say. It yellow and blue. It actually has an extra safety strap around it, so you don't hurt your fingers, eh? And some Viking script. This is the American version, the high-tech and pest control. It's a systems thing. The next thing we need is for Frank to build an app so you can actually see the mice moving online when they work. So this is what it is to be an entrepreneur. Now, I want to talk about entrepreneurship in the welfare sector, which I think is a fantastic opportunity and has been a great opportunity in Sweden. Today, 20% of all welfare is privatized. Primary schools, care of all people, preschool and so on. And the biggest sort of success in that is the people who drive around and take care of people in their homes. But half of that is privatized. And my sister-in-law, she works with this, so I know the figures are correct. And you often start in a community with a 50% customer care time. And to increase the effectiveness to 65% is usually not so difficult, a bit of logistics and other stuff, eh? And that means you can actually have 10% more contact with your patients or customers and still have a 15 to 20% profit potential. So this is how privatization works. You can have profit and you can actually eventually cut the cost and in the end also have lower taxes. This has become so successful that risk capital companies have moved in and the government is now trying to a bit restrict it actually. We have another sector, we have very high salaries and the government then said, well, okay, we have high salaries, we want to keep that, so how can you lower the cost? So we have two programs, one is in the building construction area where you can get a 50% subsidy. The companies can, and the other one, which is new, was quite controversial 7-8 years ago when the center conservative government introduced it, is care in homes, the RUT program. And these are now grown so rapidly that the new socialist government is trying to restrict this in some way. Now the home service area has created 11,000 full-time jobs in about 7 years. The growth rate in 2013 was 16% and last year 20 to 25%. Over 500,000 customers, 63% of the managers here are women. Sweden has one of the lowest women's management or women entrepreneur rates in the world, or in Europe at least, of 1 in 4 is a woman. And here it's 2 out of 3. 42% of the employed are foreign born, and 81% female, and 5.5 billion kronor in revenues. So, and most of these companies are fairly small. Only 2 are really big. And then in the building area, about 20,000 jobs that would have been sort of in the black market are now white, so they will pay taxes and revenue to the government. Last year, 17 billion kronor were paid out, so the total business is like 34 billion kronor. Now compare that to our military budget in Sweden, which is 42 billion. So it's, you know, it's a lot of money. And the increase last year was by 2 billion kronor. So now the government is cutting down the rate from 50 to 30% to save supposedly 6 billion. You see how that works. The point in these things is that you need a really big tax break to have a really big effect. If you do a 10% thing, it's not so much. That's all about privatizing the welfare sector. I think that we'll have to do that for a number of reasons, which I won't go into now.
Okay. Thank you very much. So join us up here for a little bit of discussion before we round off, and we'll be going out to the floor as well. And now I know why you wanted my microphone. You wanted to argue for tax subsidies for certain sectors of the economy, and
I'm not just telling you the facts.
okay, we have a question here.
Okay, hi. My name is Stefan and I'm an entrepreneur. Well, I see it like there's a problem with the politicians, as you mentioned, Christians, and also the academia, and they're kind of putting their head in the sand as the ostrich. That is something they're doing all the time. They don't really do anything about the problem. And I want to mention a movie with Robert De Niro, where the subject is Meet the Fuckers. And he says it has to be in the circle of trust. And all these politicians are in the circle of trust. And all these entrepreneurs are outside. We're not getting in there at all. And we are part of the solution, but nobody wants to see it because they have their head in the sand. This psychology, what is going on here. And the Swedish consensus society is doing it better than we're doing it here, because here we have this 95%. Yeah. 5% who is actually saying the Denmark that you know. That is the campaign going on. Everybody wants the Denmark as we know it. So nobody wants this change. What are we going to do about that?
Okay, nobody wants to change. Well, it's like Jean-Claude Juncker said. It's quite simple. We know what to do, but we don't know how to get re-elected. Yes. But on the other hand, let me point out one thing. You're saying 96% of Danes don't want change. But if you look at developments over the last 30, 40 years, we had a business tax rate of over 50%, down to 22 in a couple of years. We had a top marginal tax rate of around 80%. It's down, not by anywhere near enough, but it's down to 56. We had an 11-year unemployment benefit period. That's down to 2 years on paper. We've more or less privatized gradually, partially, our pension system. A lot of stuff has been going on in this country and in many other countries as well.
I think you're right. That's why I live here.
So we have this dichotomy. We're saying politicians don't want to do things and they are ostracists, but they are doing some things. They are. It's possible. Change is possible. So let's discuss that for a little while. Yes?
Well, I got a mic.
Yes, you do.
But you may take it away. One little side note to your remark. I fully understand that entrepreneurs don't get involved in politics. They have to solve their day-to-day problems and survive and be responsible for their companies and for their employees. So this is one thing. On the other hand, politics is a dirty job. You have to just admit that. And but politicians want to be re-elected. You mentioned that. But there are some. In Germany, for example, Schröder, as a social democrat, who brought about the change, fully knowing that he will not be re-elected when he does those reforms that were so badly needed at the German labor market, and now is one of the drivers of the successes of the German economy.
Are you saying he sacrificed his political career for
Germany?
Germany?
I don't know if he's saying, well, obviously, yes. I mean, he's having a much better job now, and he's more fun, obviously. So he knowingly, probably, or he was playing with the idea that, once he's not chancellor, he will be promoted to a board position where he probably can tie some loose ends together and make money. Eventually, but as we say, entrepreneurs don't do what they do because they want to make money as a primary reason. They want to improve and get things done and solved, and I think this is a driving force as well.
I think where the Danish democracy probably has come to the end of its wits is when a structural change is needed. Because the structure of the Danish welfare state, of any European welfare state, US Obama state as well, is just wrong? Why are there all these monopolies now? No,
That's what Stefan talked about. That Sweden has moved in the direction of introducing markets and competition in parts of the welfare sector.
Maybe little by little. Maybe that's the way to go about it.
I think you will have to privatize, because taxes won't be enough for all the capital that's needed in you to invest, in with the demographic shift and everything else. So whether we like it or not, and I like it, it will move in the private sector, move in to more privatization. Okay. Now you talked about the Denmark as we know it and so on. I mean, and Frank talked about politicians wanting a status quo basically, and that's what happened in Sweden. We had an election and there were two big blocks about the same size, and then a third party, and to neutralize the third party, the two blocks neither had a majority, made a deal across and said, okay, you can rule now, even if you don't have a majority, we won't vote against your budget, as long as if we get the power next time, you won't vote against our budget. And I think this was a bad deal, not very democratic, but it could have been solved in other ways. But unfortunately, politicians are very slow unless you have a pressure to change things.
Yeah, I'd like to add two things. First of all, let me just point to my friend Andreas Baer's book, The Capitalist Welfare State. Andreas argues that the Nordic welfare states have survived.
Who's a Swede?
He's from Lund University and the IFN in Stockholm, yes. He said that the Nordic welfare states have survived and become sort of successful because they have managed to introduce liberalizing reforms whenever they've run their head against the wall, basically. So they've had timely reforms that have allowed them to finance the welfare state on and on again. The problem, and I think Andreas agrees with that, is that for the last 15 years or so on, that hasn't happened in Denmark. So now we're lagging behind the other so-called welfare states because we haven't privatized welfare services, we haven't introduced reforms, we haven't deregulated. And we used to do that. Now, the second thing, just when we talk about entrepreneurship, just let me point to what academics call the schizophrenic firm. So if you're an entrepreneurial firm, a new startup or something, you want competition. It's good for you, but as soon as you become a non-entrepreneurial established firm, you're likely to lobby politicians for anti-competitive measures, regulations that benefit you and so on. So there's always this weird mix in the business community, and the lobbying interests are from the established firms because the new firms are not in the circles of interest, or sometimes they just don't exist yet, which basically means that once you get the lobbying effects on mostly the right wing, it's going to be pro-business and not pro-market policies. I think we see that all over the Western world.
Does that mean that there's a risk of a vicious circle and a chance of a good circle, what do you call it, beneficial circle, in the sense that if you have a stagnant economy with very few entrepreneurial firms, you will have big business running it and making it more stagnant, and you'll have even less entrepreneurs? Do you have that, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, you can easily think of a stagnant economy that faces a crisis, and the first thing these firms want are bailouts. Does that look like something we know?
Okay, we have a question here.
Yes, my name is Bertel Lohmann Andersen. I'm a physicist, not an economist. I have a short question, but first I have to ask to say that as far as I understand the free market, there is a production, a consumption, and a storage facility. Now, economists want to make a free market for electricity. But as a physicist, I can assure you that there exists no large-scale storage possibility for electricity. So the free market for electricity is never going to work. Never. And my question is, have you as economists heard from engineers that such a storage facility does not exist?
we take another couple of questions? I think you were first.
I'm a bit confused here because
Please say your name.
Suresh is my name, by the way. There's one gentleman who says that entrepreneurship and getting something out of nothing, for example, Terry says it. But there's another gentleman who's the last speaker who said that privatization in Sweden is another form of entrepreneurship. Honestly, where should I put my best bet? Actually, if I were a smart person, I would say I would go for Terry because that's where I see the challenge.
Okay. We'll take a third question.
I think we should all pause and note that he wants to go for me. I think thank you very much for that. This made my day. I appreciate it. We'll come back to that.
Hi, Edward again. I'll just pull up Frank quickly about, you said what people want is they want pro-immigration, whereas actually if you look at every opinion poll and how people are voting in Western Europe, they definitely want anti-immigration policies, especially low-skilled, so that's not correct. My question, though, is to Terry, whose talk I did enjoy. But you said that entrepreneurs aren't crusaders. But doesn't that overlook what used to be a traditional sector within Britain, such as the Quakers or the cooperative movement, where their values and their reasons for entrepreneurship were because they were crusading? And also, isn't that a problem for us if people who believe in social change think the only way to do that is through the state and not through entrepreneurship? Is it really a surprise that we don't have a culture of entrepreneurship in the UK or in other countries?
Okay, you have such brilliant minds that you can take one more question and still remember them all. Or maybe this is a comment.
Well, it was a question. Frank was saying that 96% is voting. To some degree, the previous question spoke to that. I was thinking in terms of political entrepreneurship, that Terry's model, where he speaks of identifying the market. Is that number 96% a reflection that the Danish political parties do an exquisitely precise listening to the electorate and deliver precisely what they want? The last question suggests not on everything. Or is the 96% meaning that no one is actually offering the change that is desired, so there's a latent market demand that no political entrepreneur has stepped up to deliver?
Okay, wow.
Can I comment on immigration?
Yes, you can.
Yeah, definitely. I think there are rent seekers that we talked here about, big business who want to protect their businesses through the government, through a violent implementation of some kind of regulation, because that's what the government is. It's a violent monopoly that we still use because of where we come from. It's a way of thinking that we somehow mentally have not come beyond. So yeah, a lot of people also on the other end of the ladder, not rich bankers or established business, they also want to protect their jobs. They don't want foreigners to come in and take their jobs, even though they can do them as well, cheaper, and they use the government for it. And that's the problem. I think that's a paradigm of the democratic state, that you get towards this sort of rent-seeking consensus where probably Denmark is today. I don't think there's a pending demand for change. I think it will happen when there's competition from the outside.
I'd like to comment on that social change question as well. I think entrepreneurship is driving social change. I think the internet revolution we've seen is driving fantastic social change very, very quickly. And 10 years ago, Google and Facebook were in their infancies, hardly existed. And I don't know if some of you have probably read Bill Browder's book, Red Notice. If not, do read it, because one of the key there is how he uses YouTube to put pressure both on the Russian government, on Putin, and on the American government. It's quite fascinating.
Okay. Terry, you had is this on the social change as well?
The social thing.
Yeah. I reacted to that as well when I heard you say it. I didn't like hearing it.
Well,
I don't know why.
I didn't hear that. I mean, this was part of the objective, right?
Okay.
One, the 94% of people that they're voting for, that believe they're voting for no change, 100% of them are wrong. Yeah. There is no possibility to stand still in the stream of the world. We're spinning around at 680 miles an hour right now. We just don't feel the change as it's happening to us, so we pretend, because it makes us feel more secure, that change is not occurring. I was in Ireland a couple years ago visiting some of my wife's family, and we were staying with them, and their 4 adult children now have all moved more than 8 hours by plane away. And I said to them, well, what do you think of that? They're having grandchildren now, and they don't see them, and they said, well, it's horrifying. And I said, well, why did they leave? And they go, oh, because Ireland's dreadful. And I go, why don't you change it? And we go, well, we don't want to change it now. But it was a very interesting sort of a dichotomy that occurs. So the world will change around them. Eventually, like a business, it will fail, and someone will do a hostile takeover. Maybe Denmark will take over Ireland. It's slightly warmer, I don't know. But back to this question of crusading, which is
we have been there before, you know.
Social change. When you crusade, and I understand what you're imagining. We see images of Bill Gates standing in front of a 50-foot or 100-foot tall screen and talking with a microphone like this, and it's all very revival-like. It looks like a religious revival of sorts, and you know, people hold up their iPhones and they will sway them back and forth. But I would suggest that is a result of entrepreneurship. That is not entrepreneurship. Okay. Entrepreneurship, you're building businesses, and that is fundamentals. I routinely have people that are partners of mine who come to me and say, we want to do these things. And I'm like, okay, if you can build a business case around that I get a return off of it, let's do it. If you want to do that, do it with your own money. Do it after you've earned the money. I'll give you an example. We have a series of butcher shops. In the United States had gone to all giant IKEA-like grocery stores. Imagine an IKEA when you buy your food. You have 10,000 horrible choices. But at any rate, so once something gets to a super size, the best strategy then is to make it small again. So after all banks consolidate, then you start a bank. Once all countries consolidate, all the EU consolidates, then you start a new country. It's not part of that. It's a very interesting strategy. So back to this idea of crusading, so that I don't get the microphone taken away from that. I said to my business partner in the meat company, who had hired a bunch of employees that he felt like he needed to give jobs. And I said, you know what's going to happen. All of your people who don't need the help are going to lose their jobs because you're going to ruin the company. Make money, earn money, build a business, and then do whatever the hell you want with the money that you've earned. The idea of when someone comes to me and says, I want to crusade, I'm like, you don't want to run a business. They're not the same thing.
Barbara?
May I quickly come back to the young gentleman's question in the back? Entrepreneurs seek opportunity, and we, as economists and as free marketeers, need to unbundle big government. And this is why privatization is a perfect opportunity to create create jobs and, of course, have new entrepreneurs come up. So the healthcare system or the healthcare branch, or if you want, industry, has changed so much in the past decade and will change from individualized medicine and everything for the next decades and coming up years. So there will be so many different entrepreneurs and startups and ideas coming into this. This is a whole field for a play field for entrepreneurs. So eventually in 5 years you will ask Stefan, hey, what else can you privatize, or what can we privatize to create new entrepreneurs? I would not wait about that.
But there are in the getting entrepreneurship into the sectors that we've decided to call the welfare state, and that's just a political choice, because education, caring for the elderly, etc., you know, that could be privately provided very easily. Getting entrepreneurship into that, there are so many barriers, because even if you have private providers, if it's taxpayers paying for it, you have politicians defining what it is those private providers are going to supply. And then you can't get much entrepreneurship, because the politicians are saying you need to do this, and you need to employ these people, and you need to have so many of them, and you need to do exactly the way we're telling you, because that is our service level, as we call it in Denmark. And that's basically defined, that's basically saying entrepreneurship not allowed.
This is why we have to cut taxes in order to reduce the revenues by government that can be redistributed and allow free entrepreneurs and not regulate.
Or have politicians accept that people get a voucher? You know, if you want to tax finance, if you want the taxpayer to pay for it, they give people a voucher. You were talking about the educational system in the US, and that is a very illiberal system in the classical liberal sense. Whereas the Danish and Swedish systems actually have a voucher. You can, to some degree, choose what kind of education your children want. You can choose a private school, and you take your voucher with you to that private school.
We have had a school voucher in Sweden for about 20 years, and in our town, half the students, it's a suburb of Stockholm, they take the voucher and they go to a specialized, usually private school in Stockholm itself, to study the things they really want to study.
Okay. Christian, any thoughts on getting entrepreneurship into the welfare?
Yeah, I'd just like to I think it's a great question about how to achieve this social change. But when I think about crusaders, I think about people who want to tell me what to do. And I think entrepreneurs are not like that. Almost by definition, they're not like that. I think entrepreneurs and a lot of free market academics don't like to be crusaders, but what we like to do, at least sometimes, is to call the crusaders bluffs in the public debate. And at least sometimes I think that's just as worthy as being a crusader, showing that, hey, the guys who are crusading for something are just demonstrably wrong.
Actually, I wanted to respond to the gentleman who's the physicist asking about electricity markets. Yeah. Many years ago, I was Washington rep for the New York Mercantile Exchange, and we built energy markets. And the key here is you don't need storage, you need futures markets. And you actually have electricity markets some places where the suppliers agree to supply a certain amount of electricity at a certain point, at a certain time. And as long as you separate distribution from the production of electricity, you can have a very fine functioning market all the time. There's a lot of technical ways of doing this, but again, you don't need storage to have markets.
Okay, I think we need to wrap up. It says, 20 to 6, I'm supposed to sum up, and I guess I could sort of try to persuade you that I had planned to sum up for 20 minutes, but it doesn't sound very plausible. So I think unless there's really, really pressing question, I think now is the time for me to sum up, which I will do in this way. I think this has been great. Thank you very much for coming.